Nintendo is known as a legendary company. They have completely changed the gaming industry multiple times. And while the old school crowd knows about their accomplishments in the 80s when the gaming industry was in the gutters, most people who watch this channel are more familiar with a different era, the late 90s, when Nintendo was one of the first companies ever to experiment with 3D worlds in video games. And especially Super Mario 64 played a role in all of this. Heck, even today people speak very highly of it. But recently I found out that Nintendo created a sequel, a new Super Mario 64-like adventure that almost no one has ever seen. And no, it's not Super Mario Sunshine or Galaxy. It is actually a completely different game. So what is it about? What does it look like? What kind of levels can be found in the game? And is it in terms of story and setting similar to Super Mario 64? Well, let's find out. Now in 1996, the world changed with the release of Super Mario 64, the first 3D platformer by Nintendo that took over the world. Now while most people expected them to run into some form of trouble, they actually navigated the tricky concepts of 3D very well and made a masterpiece. However, sadly enough, they weren't really able to make a whole lot of money on it because the Nintendo 64 didn't do well. During this era, Nintendo was on the back foot. In general, this is something you see a lot in the history of the company. They become the king of the industry, get too confident and slip up because of it, and then they end up at the bottom. We've seen this 2 times already. And so it seemed like they wanted to make another Super Mario title that was similar to Super Mario 64, but on a new console to finally reap the rewards. Now all of this started back in 1998 with a game known among Nintendo employees as Super Mario 64 2, a weird little game that was intended for release in 1999, and it was going to be for the Nintendo 64 DD. This was a device that used a magnetic floppy disk drive for the Nintendo 64, and it was supposed to allow the console to do more. It would expand data storage, added a real-time clock for persistent game world design, and a standard font and audio library for further storage efficiency. Now the idea of the 64 DD wasn't completely alien back in those days. Another one like it that they released earlier in the console's lifecycle was known as the Nintendo 64 Expansion Pack. This was an add-on for the Nintendo 64 that doubled the amount of RAM the N64 had to 8 MB, which allowed for greater resolution, longer draw distances, and more detailed graphics. And it was actually required to play games like Majora's Mask, otherwise they just didn't have enough power. However, this 64DD add-on was on a completely different level, because aside from adding the features I mentioned before, it would also add 46 MB of extra RAM, 4 times as much as the expansion pack would give the N64 in total. As you can imagine, this would give the console a huge boost, and the expansion pack was a success, and so they expected it to work. But in the end, this whole concept was a failure. Sure, the idea is interesting, but in the end it was more effective to just release a brand new console. And that was also the reason why Super Mario 64 2 was cancelled in the end. The whole 64DD idea just didn't work. In the end, only one demo level was ever made, but was never publicly revealed, so we know very little about it. Heck, it's even possible that Super Mario Sunshine, Super Mario Galaxy, and Super Mario Galaxy 2 could have salvaged elements from this cancelled sequel. Nintendo even said during an E3 event that other characters and concepts discarded from the first game were set to return in this game, such as Luigi and a rideable Yoshi. And these elements did make a return in other future titles like Super Mario Galaxy and Super Mario Sunshine. So in the end, they did use some of the concepts from this game in other titles we all know and love. So it wasn't a complete waste of time. However, is this it? Is this the great Super Mario 64 sequel I spoke about in the beginning? Well, no. This isn't the end of the story. Development for a potential sequel actually continued in a different form, and it was known as Super Mario 128, which actually started off as a tech demo that was first shown at Space World 2000, and at the time it was a potential game for the Nintendo GameCube or Wii, according to Nintendo themselves. So while this was the first time we would ever see or hear of this title, it is actually a lot older than most people think, because the name Super Mario 128 first came up in an issue of Nintendo Power from 1997, and it said that the name Super Mario 128 was a possible name for the Super Mario 64 sequel. Now, as far as I could find, this idea for a sequel was different from Super Mario 64 2, and was also in development a whole lot longer. Now, the tech demo I mentioned earlier featured 128 Marios running around at the same time, which sounds weird, but there was a reason for it. Now, the Marios could manipulate the terrain by bringing the structure up and down, and they could also change the board to a pizza. This little tech demo was intended to test the large amount of bots that the GameCube could handle, a deed that was nearly impossible for the Nintendo 64. And so this, together with the article from Nintendo Power, confirmed for many that Nintendo was working on a Super Mario 64 sequel for the new GameCube console. But then, at that point, Nintendo went silent. For years, they didn't mention anything regarding this project, while new Super Mario titles were still coming out like Super Mario Sunshine. So what happened? Well, in 2005, Reggie Fils-Aimé said that Super Mario 128 would make an appearance at E3 that year. But in the end, this didn't happen. And that same year, Miyamoto gave us some information on the game. He said that Mario would be in a game with a new character by his side, and that it would not be on the GameCube but on the Wii. And then in 2006, Miyamoto confirmed that Super Mario 128 was actually cancelled. But many of the elements from the demo were used in Metroid Prime, Super Mario Galaxy, and The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. So just like the first attempt at a sequel, the game didn't make the cut, but a lot of ideas were recycled. But what happened to all those little Marios? Well, believe it or not, in 2007, Miyamoto said that he released them into the wild, and now they have their own mini Mario village somewhere near Mount Fuji. Nah, that was a joke. He actually told us after his keynote speech that Super Mario 128 was turned into the Pikmin franchise. So while we never really got a Super Mario 64 sequel and only a remake, it did influence almost every other Nintendo game made in the decade after. Which is pretty cool if you ask me. And hey, at least they didn't just throw everything away like they do sometimes. So in the end, there wasn't an actual sequel out there then? Well, yes and no. It's unknown if Super Mario 128 was actually fully developed as a game, so it's a bit of a mystery. And the original tech demo hasn't resurfaced or has been leaked to the internet, and all that remains of the tech demo are videos and screenshots of the one seen at Space World 2000. But maybe one day it will actually be leaked, and we can play this lost Super Mario title. And yes, this is possible. The same thing happened with Star Fox 2. This game was completed in 1995, but did not see an official release until 2017 on the Super NES Classic Edition. So who knows, maybe we will see it in the future. But for the time being, be sure to check out other mysteries I've covered on this channel, like the video covering the 3DS version of Twilight Princess, or the DS version of Super Mario Galaxy, which are on the screen right now, and also in the upper right corner. Thank you all so much for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more like it, give me ideas down below. Subscribe, click the bell button, do all the good stuff that Nintendo wants. YouTube, whoops. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the vid. Bye, kisses, woo!